Mr. Jian, Jungkook looked up as the voice invaded through the silence he was being in. Looking up, his eyes were met with Taehyung's blue ones, who stood there at the doorstep of his office. At home, hands linked at the front, shoulders straight and lips wearing that usual sunshine smile. Kim Taehyung, the art teacher of his son. He was the famous artist of the town, and by artist it came to surface that he wasn't just the master of one kind of art that arrived in every form: dancing, writing novels and poems, painting, sketching, and even sculptures. God had gifted the most beautiful art of his hand, the ownership of every art to ever exist on the earth. He was a piece of maddening and intoxicating art himself, like a painting you see in a museum, and standing in front of it you lose the track of time, the kind of art that doesn't just make you question everything in the world, but also the reason of your existence on earth. Cause what if the only reason you were born with was to pour down every roaming piece of love over that art of God's hands? Jungkook had questioned that since the beginning, since the first time he saw Taehyung in that museum. And starting from that day he hadn't been able to get that question out of his head. Jungkook held his gaze and nodded, almost absent-mindedly. It was a common occurrence in Taehyung's prisons. His mind lost the normal lane. His heart couldn't seem to function properly, and every body part of his repulsed the broken instructions of his own brain. Everything came at the stage of war with himself, just to stay there, motionless in front of Taehyung for long enough until every sensation goes numb. Taehyung entered the room in his glory and sat himself over the chair in front of Jungkook's desk, lacing his fingers. He placed them over Jungkook's desk, and inhaling a deep breath he began. Mr. Jian, we had a talk about this. Taehyung, Jungkook spoke up, keeping up his professional tone, although everything going on inside him, from his heart to his soul, and the COK thickening in his legs because of the breathtaking, absolutely tempting sight of Taehyung, was everything but professionally normal. You won't be calling me Mr. Jian? It's been months since we talked about this, and you still haven't let go of this. Taehyung dropped his eyes on the desk, smiling. His thick, long eyelashes became visible to Jungkook, and only served to add into the havoc that currently went in his flesh and his soul because of Taehyung. God, he was such a goddess. There couldn't be anyone like him. Never. He was made with special formed angels that might have ruled the heaven, God knows. But Taehyung wasn't made like every other human being on earth. Cause one look at him, and it was certain that this person wasn't meant to be here among mortal humans. No, he wasn't. All right, Jungkook, Taehyung said, nodding. I came here to let you know that I won't be able to come for high-in this weekend. Jungkook's brows furrowed, drawing themselves closer until 3 lines appeared. What? Why? Is everything okay? Taehyung nodded, uncrossing his arms from his chest. He looked down at the table before meeting Jungkook's eyes again. Well, my colleague asked me out. I have a date this weekend, so I wouldn't be able to come. For a second, Jungkook stopped feeling his heart. Someone had asked Taehyung out on a date. A date. When he had captured Jungkook's interest in one of the events 2 years back, he had done his research on him, and then came to know that since becoming a well-known artist, Taehyung had gotten many proposals, but none of them were accepted by him. Many businessmen of his age, successful artists from around the globe, cause he wasn't just an artist himself, he was a muse to many of the artists all around the world too. The extent of how he evoked the artistic side of a person could be given by how Jungkook bought a canvas and paintbrushes after seeing Taehyung for the first time, and drew him spending the whole night just from a little glimpse of his, and he drew after a decade. You are going on a date? Jungkook asked. The question came out as something more of which he was trying to tell himself than what he was asking again from Taehyung to clarify. Yeah, that's what I said earlier, Jungkook, Taehyung said, nodding. Someone who has been hazing me around for a while asked me out last night. We are meeting this weekend. Jungkook assumed the world to cease for a second while the information settled right at the pulsing center of his heart, beating and coursing through the veins of his and rising the temperature of his flesh in an instant of swallowing that confession. Taehyung was going on a date, a person on whom he had his eyes on for long enough that he had seen Taehyung going from a known artist just round in Korea to being famous globally and capturing hearts and interests of many hundred others. Jungkook's jaw tightened on its own, something he couldn't make himself to stop to do. It was an honest reaction to the information. He couldn't bring himself to not react to it and act like it didn't matter. Getting himself back from the table, Jungkook leaned against the backrest of the chair, opening the button of his coat, placing his arm over his chair. He let out a breath, shaking his head. No, I can't let you have the off. His voice came sharper than usual, thick and raspy. The words had Taehyung's expressions and body language changing in an instant. He blinked his eyes at Jungkook, straightening his back cautiously, and opened his mouth. Surprisingly, for the first time, his eyes wavered in front of Jungkook, and instead of making him feel bad about it, Jungkook felt good. Taehyung had ocean blue eyes. Those eyes were like the hands of heaven concealed in the ocean, that overpassed the magnitude of universe, like the infinite borders where universe was extended. Onto Taehyung's eyes held that depth. Whenever Jungkook stared in those eyes, those blue hands of heaven grasped his soul and yanked him in. For the first time, when those eyes wavered in front of his piercing gaze, that felt like he was laying on the tranquil surface of the ocean, where waves rippled and bathed down at him in the most soothing and comforting ways possible. Taehyung ended up breaking the silence after finally swallowing the bitterness laced in those words. I have a personal life, Mr. Jian. If you don't allow me, I won't come myself. It's not that. You'll come this weekend. I'll pay you triple of the amount I give you every month. Jungkook blurted without giving second thoughts to his words. He didn't even know how the words came out of his mouth, and had Taehyung's eyes widening a bit at the rawness of the emotions of jealousy burning inside him. He paid him $50,000 a month. It was just for the 1 hour time he gave to Hyeon, but cause of his popularity and the way the time he spent in his living room helping out Hyeon with learning things along with some musical instruments, became convenient for Jungkook to keep an eye on him from the cameras installed in the living room. He watched his every move, every little movement of his finger, every minute after he changed his position. Everything about him didn't go unnoticed by Jungkook. What? Taehyung's voice in utmost wonder came a little louder. What do you mean? Jungkook shrugged confidently. I didn't stutter. Taehyung gulped, wholly taken aback by the sudden offer. I don't get it. Why can't I take 1 weekend off? 4 times. I'll pay 4 times the amount you get every month if you come this weekend. You're kidding me. Taehyung breathed, chuckling. It can't. What's so special this weekend? Hyeon doesn't have. You'll come this weekend at mine's. Jungkook breathed out thick, voice which was slightly higher than being a raspy hot whisper. But the sharpness of his eyes and the unbearable addition of his tightened posture and jaws was a declaration to Taehyung that he wasn't asking. No, he wasn't. He was ordering. And the look on his face was serious enough that if he could tell Taehyung at that time that he was going next second to the moon and sunrises in the west, he would definitely believe him in a second. Even though Jungkook knew that it wasn't something permanent. This couldn't be a permanent solution. If not this weekend, then Taehyung could set up that date to the next weekend by offering him the deals and ordering him with that cruelty-filled look over his face. He couldn't stop him. Not for long, at least. Taehyung thought for a second, and then sighing defeatedly, he nodded. Okay, I'll come to teach Hyeon this weekend too and set that up later. If you are insisting, then it must be important to Hyeon, and thanks for the offer, but I decline that deal you offered, Taehyung said in one breath, and then he was getting up, sliding his chair back. He stood up and without glancing back at Jungkook and locating the relief pouring down his eyes to his flesh and the lightness getting over his posture, he turned his back at him and went down for the door. Just when he placed his hand over the doorknob, Jungkook's voice stopped him in the middle. Come earlier. In the afternoon, 1 p.m. Hyeon. Taehyung didn't even let him complete his sentence before he said, Okay, Mr. Jian, in his pure, intensely deep and thick professional voice that for a second, instead of making Jungkook feel bad about what he had just done, had goosebumps rising right at the back of his neck. Just when Taehyung opened the door and closed it behind himself, Jungkook smiled. staring the lane, which Taehyung just took with his heavenly feet up to the door. His eyes smiled along with his lips as he muttered to himself, "You won't be able to name yourself as someone else's after this weekend." Pacing around the kitchen, Jungkook looked over to the dishes he had prepared himself. Being in the kitchen since the morning, he had given off to the workers, maids and male servants. The mansion was empty except him and Taehyung, who was yet to arrive. He had made the dishes which he knew were liked by Taehyung. He had heard Hyein and Taehyung talking about that in little breaks which Taehyung gave to Hyein. Surprisingly, well, not that of a surprise. Like father like son, Hyein was a huge fan of Taehyung. He loved him dearly, overpassing Jungkook himself sometimes. Jungkook set up the table right in the middle of the dining room and lit up the candles, closing the blinds and turning behind. He took the last look of the table. Taehyung's favorite dishes placed in a sequence, red wine at the corner, and glasses and eyes right beneath the table. Not the kind of date which Jungkook at the age of 45 should be being happy and getting jittery about, like he was a kid who was having the first date of his life. But that was something which Taehyung did to him with no effort. He made him a little boy with new sensation and new feelings, a young adult, some 18-year-old, with a silly mind having a silly, obsessive crush on someone, dusting off the non-existent particle present over his apron. Jungkook inhaled a deep breath and took off the apron. He had already prepared the dishes, only set them over the table after getting ready. Now, sitting over the couch, he had just landed his eyes back on his watch when the footsteps of someone coming closer entered his ears. The more the sound of Taehyung approaching increased, the more his heart rate escalated. Sweat poured out in his palms, and just when a figure stalked right in the front, Jungkook managed to look up, meeting Taehyung's widened eyes from the little light that came from the candles placed at the table nearby. Taehyung looked shocked, completely taken aback. He stood at the same place, like he had seen a ghost or someone had casted a spell over him that had him standing there like a statue of metal or wood. He couldn't move, nor he seemed to breathe under the scrutiny of Jungkook's eyes. Jungkook gathered the courage to stand up, although the way his heart was beating, it felt like he could pass out in the next second with no turning back in this world. Still, he managed to stand upright in front of Taehyung at a fair distance. "Have a dinner with me," he said, slowly instead, fear glinting in his eyes, like he was currently in the middle of war and peace, heaven and hell, like universes were combining, colliding, and breaking down in his head and his blood. Taehyung gulped visibly, despite not having enough light that could let them have a better look of each other. The silence around them was so thick and strangling that both of them could predict the rate at which the other's heart was beating and running. "It's not a request, not even a question," Taehyung said instead. "You are ordering me." Jungkook shrugged. "I want you," he said, and Taehyung's breath audibly hitched. "I don't want you to choose between yes and no. I want you to come and have me," Jungkook almost whispered, roaming his eyes all over Taehyung's face. Stepping closer to Taehyung, Jungkook kept his eyes on him, never letting his Veget slide out of his sight. The tension rose in the room as the temperature seemed to increase suddenly in the room. In the same pace as steadily, Jungkook's feet dragged him closer to Taehyung, and the other one kept stepping back as steadily as him. Taehyung's breath got stuck against his throat just when his back got pressed against the wall, and Jungkook leaned himself closer to him, planting his palm right next to his head over the wall, never daring to break the intense eye contact with him. "What are you doing?" Taehyung asked, breathing. Jungkook licked his lips and slowly, keeping himself aware that he wasn't crossing boundaries with Taehyung, and if Taehyung really wanted it, he landed his other hand over Taehyung's waist, breathing greedily in the air being left by Taehyung's half-open mouth. "You have no idea how much I have waited and craved for you," Jungkook muttered, leaning close and close until their nose tips brushed. "Have spent every hour you spent here watching you from distance, loving you and exploring you from the feet of my eyes." Taehyung plastered his back against the wall. "What if I don't want you? What if I don't have any feelings for you and will never have? What if this date never works?" "I'd make it work," Jungkook said. "Instead, I'd make it work for us, for you." I know I have a son. Ji-hyun reacted in an instant, getting his palm attached to the mouth of Jungkook, silencing him. Don't bring Hye-in, Jungkook. I love him. Ji-hyun said in one breath. But you and me, we are different. So different. What you are in front of this world am. Not that. What do I even own? What do I have? My heart. Jungkook spoke up. You captured my interest the first event I saw you on. You took over my world as I kept spending my days thinking about you. And then you slowly made your way to my heart and stole it. Made it yours. Ji-hyun shook his head, sighing. Not what you are. Soul is yours. Career is. Ji-hyun's hands flew over to his forehead, his thumbs rubbing his temples. I can't be here with you like this. It's not what I. Jungkook cursed under his breath and then cradling Ji-hyun's face, he forced him to look at himself. Look at me, he breathed, pulling Ji-hyun's face closer to himself enough that their lips brushed. Nothing matters more than you, he tenderly voiced out. What I own is nothing. It's nothing in front of what you are. Say a word and it will be gone. I have fallen for you, the first person whom my world accepted as mine, who was able to reach my heart and leave his prince behind after Hyeon's mother died. You are the one, Ji-hyun. Jungkook managed to breathe out the words steadily, and then pressing his chest against Ji-hyun's, he inhaled in a deep breath, mustering up his courage from inside. He leaned in and pecked Ji-hyun's lips, feeling the shudder that ran down Ji-hyun's body because of the sudden act. Ji-hyun opened his closed eyes, looking in Jungkook's. If Jungkook's eyes hadn't been able to scream the truth, as Ji-hyun looked in those eyes, then he would probably taken the words as just being said by Jungkook from no emotions inside. But the words were as true as directly being translated by the depths of his soul and the unsaid language of his eyes. His words were true and sincere. I'm into self-harming, Ji-hyun said, being afraid and
holding
scared
his
of what
weakening body
might be
close
Jungkook's
to
reaction
his
to
sturdy
that.
toned
But
one.
Jungkook's
Rubbed
hold
his
instead
nose
of
over
loosening on
Ji-hyun's cheek.
Ji-hyun tightened.
Tell me,
even
do you
more,
want me?
like he
Don't
was
think
trying to
about
secure
what
I
him.
own. Save him.
Cause I'd rather set
Silently
it all
from
on
the
fire
mending touch.
than have you gone because of
Ji-hyun's
it.
throat
I
popped. I
have fallen
stopped
for you
dating.
truly.
I stopped believing people. I stopped going out in this lane of love and attachments cause it made me like this. I'm not what you are seeing. I'm not this beautiful. Not from under these clothes. Not from. Try me, Jungkook whispered. Offer me the broken canvas of yourself and watch how I spend my entire life treasuring it and taking care of it, Jungkook said, and then cupped his nape, looking in his ocean blue eyes. Your scars aren't scars, even if you are the one who has given it to yourself. They aren't scars, at least not the ones which the world may find repulsive. They aren't scars. Ji-hyun, Jungkook muttered firmly. They are the stars of my sky that gives the light of revelation that you are strong, that you fought for yourself, Jungkook assured him, stroking his cheeks. It doesn't change what I feel for you, no matter what you hold over your flesh. Doesn't change what I feel for your soul. It can never change that. Not that, ever. Ji-hyun's eyes watered a little as he looked in his eyes, and with weak hands he curled his fingers around Jungkook's wrist. I don't deserve you. You are perfect. You are perfect for me, Jungkook said, interrupting him in the middle. No matter what I am, you are the meaning, translation, and definition of perfection for me. You are that for me, Ji-hyun. Jungkook pulled himself closer to Ji-hyun, joining their fronts together. I love you. Is it that hard to get? Ji-hyun. How? Ji-hyun circled his arms around Jungkook slowly, grasping his hair from the back, while his other hand came down to press over his nape. Ji-hyun pulled him closer, closing eyes and parting lips. Jungkook took in what was gonna happen, and without resisting, he closed his own eyes and leaned in, diving himself into the heaven named Ji-hyun. Hands curled into the collars, tucking Jungkook close as their lips met. In the dim light of candles coming from the far-off dinner table, breaths combined, souls intertwined as flesh rubbed against flesh and mouths fused with no resistance. In between, sweet, sour, and a hint of chocolate, probably something that came into the taste bud of both of them from Ji-hyun himself, cause Jungkook had seen him keeping chocolates and Candy's with himself and he eats
them continuously whenever he is
stressed or nervous.